Hello and welcome back to the Dougie Critchley football YouTube channel for another episode of The Truth. Sam Tighe is not with me, but Jack Collins is in the hot seat, and today the topic is the mighty Black Cats finally, I say finally, it's been a little while, but fourth in the Premier League after 9 games. Can it continue? What can they achieve this season? On with the video. It's going to be a fascinating weekend. We've got Everton on Monday Night Football, and it gives Sunderland a great opportunity to capitalise on what has been an amazing start. And actually, although Sam would be a brilliant podcast host as ever on this as well, it's going to be quite interesting talking to you from the Fulham perspective as well, given that you are now an established Premier League side. I know you've had a poor start to this season, but you've kind of done what Sunderland are looking to do.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned...
I'm the last side, or the last of the 3 promoted side really to do it, right? Like, because that season where Fulham stayed up, where Bournemouth stayed up, where Nottingham Forest stayed up, is the last time that promoted sides kept their heads, shall we say, in the Premier League. So you're looking at it and saying... And it's not just Sunderland, obviously we're going to discuss them today, but it's not just Sunderland, it's Leeds and Burnley as well. And suddenly people are talking about not just 1 or 2 of the promoted sides staying up, but potentially all 3. And it opens the whole league out into a really interesting conversation.
Absolutely. And if you want to hear more about Burnley and Leeds, who've got off to brilliant starts as well in their own rights, go check out the Ranks FC podcast that Jack did earlier this week with Dean. But today is all about Sunderland. I put my foot down. I said, this is the time to do it because we have just beaten Chelsea at the Bridge. Unbelievable performance. I was watching in Paris. Grace, my wife, was there on a work trip last week, and I went out for the final few days of it over the weekend and was like, we need to stop sightseeing. We need to stop doing any culture. We're sitting in our hotel room for the next hour and a half and we're watching Sunderland take on Chelsea. And I didn't have much confidence going into that game. I just didn't think Chelsea would be the sort of side that we'd do well against, but we looked very solid in that game. And yes, they had a number of chances, but nothing particularly threatening. I didn't think Roefs was put into too much dangerous positions.
Couple of good saves,
but nothing felt too last ditch. And what a finish. I mean, the rumour has it that Tosin is still deciding whether to make a challenge on Brian Brobby as he let him, I think, hold on the ball for 11 seconds in the area before laying it off to Talby. And it was an amazing moment. And now Sunderland sit 4th with 17 points from their opening 9 games. It's the best start by a newly promoted side in 17 years, matching Hull's 2008-9 tally. Word of caution on that, Hull finished 17th that season. But the 5 sides in Premier League history that have achieved more points than Sunderland after 9 games, 4 of which have finished 12th or above, and 2 have qualified for the top 4. And look, at the top of the podcast, I said slightly tongue-in-cheek, can Sunderland qualify for Europe? I think it's a long, long shot. But Jack, from an outsider's perspective, it's been a pretty magnificent start and an unexpected one as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, there were going to be question marks with the amount of players that were brought in, right? Like whether you could build a squad out of them, whether you... so much of last season felt like it was built on goodwill, right? And good feeling, like that camaraderie between the fan base and the players on the pitch. We saw that in the kind of late winners and the moments in the playoffs in particular. But I think throughout the course of the season, it really felt like there was something building, that there was momentum there with Sunderland. And to then basically rip up that playbook and basically be like... we're going to need an entire new starting 11. That's risky business. Like that is, it's not just the element of trying to ingratiate a new team with each other, but also, you know, fan favourites who've come up to the Premier League with the club. And especially in terms of like the players who've either come through the academy or have been there for a long time, who kind of, their fans have taken to their hearts during this journey, which has been, you know, an incredible ascension. And look, we've seen it before, and I'm not suggesting this is going to be the same thing, but, you know, there are cautionary tales. You know, we've seen Luton and Ipswich, you know, kind of make those kind of quick jumps from League One all the way up to the Premier League and lose their heads a little bit, and now back kind of mired in problems. So I'm not sitting here and saying that that's going to happen, but there are scary stories, which is appropriate for Halloween as we're going out today. You know, that can kind of give you a little bit of the heebie-jeebies. But in terms of the way that it's all meshed together, look, you, Sam, and I sat here a year ago and we talked about why the promoted sides weren't competing. And we talked about the fact that in the middle of the pitch, duels were being lost left, right and centre, and that teams were just so easy to run through. And suddenly you're asking your defence to be superheroes every week to grind out a result. Well, you look at the teams that have come up from the Championship this season, you look at the midfields, and obviously for Sunderland, we're talking about Xhaka and Sadiki. It's a shame that Diarra picked up the injury early on, but, you know, Sadiki's slept into that role with absolutely no bother whatsoever. You look at it, you know, for Leeds with Ampadu and Longstaff, even Burnley, who were pretty much everyone's favourites to go back down in 20th with Florentino Luis and Josh Cullen and Ugachukwu. Well, what have you got in all three of those midfields? Combat. And I think that in Sunderland's case, there's a real sense of this team moves as a unit really quickly. And Regis deserves absolutely incredible amounts of praise for being able to mould that together so early on. There are certain caveats, I think, to this. Sunderland's start was relatively soft in terms of what it looked like, and that's allowed a bit of momentum to grow, but it's also allowed confidence to build within the camp. Equally, that could have been shattered by the loss at Burnley early doors, and it hasn't. That has been something that we're just comfortably put to the side. The performance against United wasn't great. Both of them comfortably put to the side, and we go again. And I think that that's a great strength, but it also means that there's been a buy-in from the crowd who elsewise, and look, I've seen this at Fulham, when new players come in and they're not performing to the extent that you think they should be, or they're not working as a whole as a team, people start being like, what about the midfielders we had in the Championship? They worked really hard. And you don't really have that because there's been such a comfortable maybe the wrong word, but because there's been such a successful start to the season. There is already that buy-in, and you can hear it at the Stadium of Light already.
Yeah, that has definitely been a key weapon, which almost added an extra layer to winning at Stamford Bridge as well. And there has been, I do take your point about easy starts. I think I saw it when the fixture day release came out. I can't even get my words out on that. It was such a heady day. I was very excited to be back in the mixer again. But Sunderland had statistically the easiest start, I think, for a number of years in terms of where teams had played, where they'd finished the previous season, I should say. But we've still played Crystal Palace, we've played Aston Villa, we've played Forest that finished in European spots last year. And obviously Forest this season, a very different story. Now Chelsea as well. But I just never could have predicted how things would have gone, given the fact that we finished a distant fourth in the Championship last year. Like way off Leeds and Burnley. At one stage, we were never going to drop out of the playoffs, but we were in sort of top two contention up until about January, February time. Really fell apart.
6 losses in a row?
Yeah, it was shocking. Going into the playoffs, we had absolutely zero form. We'd rotated heavily, which turned out to be a bit of a masterstroke. But back in the Premier League, we all know the story of how we got there. Dramatic fashion in the playoffs against Coventry in the semi-finals with Dan Ballard and then Mayenda and Tommy Watson with his final kick pretty much in a Sunderland shirt. Amazing story, but we're back in the Premier League for the first time since 2017. Theresa May was Prime Minister then. And we had a squad where there needed to be serious work in it, as you said. Sunderland's squad in the final of the playoff cost £10 million to assemble. And actually, that gave us so much leeway in this summer window, because we did spend £162 million in the summer, which was a record for a promoted side. 15 new players arriving, eventually ended up being 14 because Mark Guiu got recalled after that iconic loan spell of 2 games, 1 goal. But Chris Weatherspoon...
wishes he's back there now.
Well, exactly. Chris Weatherspoon, who writes for The Athletic, wrote a really informed piece about how Sunderland could afford that business. And I just thought it was a little bit... I thought it was very interesting and worth touching on for sure.
Yeah.
When Kirill Lewis-Dreyfus took over in 2021, he basically inherited a near blank slate financially because we'd done the double drop. We cleared out so much of the deadwood that had taken us down that double drop. And we'd had... we hadn't been carrying a sort of Championship wage bill for years. We'd got rid of all the players that we bought for the Premier League and then the Championship, etc. And we had a League One side and a lot of academy graduates. Our wage bill between 2022 and 2024 was £17.5 million. 7 Championship clubs lost more than that in a single season in 2024. So it gave us so much leeway. And who we were able to attract with that money, I think can't really be overemphasized enough. And I thought I was slightly losing my head during the summer and thought, have I got this wrong, or have Sunderland signed some really elite talent? Because, Jack, some of the players that came in that you'll know with your European hat on and just interest around Europe and world football, this didn't feel like a standard recruitment summer from a promoted side. No,
it didn't. And what I think the Sunderland have done really well in this respect is they've looked for a couple of old heads to help guide, and then they've stacked the squad with exciting young talent that, even if the worst was to happen, would maintain sell-on value, right? So you look at, the players that came in. Obviously, Lefay's move was made permanent from Roma, but then actually you look at Granit Xhaka coming in there, and I think Reinildo in particular. Those two stand out for me as the kind of older guiding lights. Ronaldo's done it for years at Atleti and in the Champions League. Granit Xhaka, we all know about. And then you kind of look at someone like a Bertrand Traore. And what this signing reminded me of in a slightly different way, and I'm sorry to keep pulling up Fulham comparisons, but I think it's a reasonable place to be. Fulham signed Ryan Babel.
Oh, yeah.
When we came back up. And actually, everyone was a bit like, it was a kind of afterthought right at the end of the window, as Bertrand Traore was.
Yep.
And people were like, what, Ryan Babel? Like, what? He was most famous for the Babel copter. That's what he's famous for. And I think that there was this sense of like, wow, it's just sort of a bit part player. But actually turned out to be one of the few bright spots in a very, very dark Fulham season. And he gave a real sense of maturity to it, not just in the way that he got forward and made things happen, but his work rate, etc., etc., and was like loved by the Fulham faithful. I watched Bertrand Traore kind of instinctively at the weekend, especially because he was facing one of his old clubs, and I'm starting to see that from him. And one of the things I think is exciting and interesting is that Simon Adingra felt like the one that people were fixated on in the summer. Like, oh, he's been good for Brighton. Like he's going to be the guy that steps up. He's got Premier League experience. I would argue that of the players that have genuinely played, he's probably made the least impact of all of Sunderland's new signings from attacking perspective.
A lot of Brighton fans told me as well, like, he's not the player you think you're getting on the basis of that first season as well. Such were his performances last year. And they were saying, we've won this deal getting Tommy Watson in, who's much more of a player for the future. And I said, let's see. But I totally agree with you. I think of our new signings, and I don't want to hammer him too much, but probably been one of the least impressive.
Yeah, I mean, look, that doesn't mean he's not going to have an impact. And I think that there's definitely still space for them to grow. And especially in a team where there's competition for places, that's a great piece to have in. But I think that then you kind of look at, obviously, the goal scorer at the weekend, Chemsedine Talbi, a brilliant, brilliant footballer. And so I was really excited to see if they'd be able to make that jump so young to the Premier League. But also, the likes of someone like a Nordi Mukiele or a Luchel Troida who started at the weekend for the first time. And you're looking at them and saying, they're Champions League caliber footballers. Like, I think that when you're looking at Talbi, you're saying, okay, he's probably a Europa League level footballer with the potential to be a world beater. And there's a few players like that in the mix. Robin Roefs has been sensational. I said midweek, it's been a good year to be a Robin R who transferred teams because Robin Risa, the goalkeeper at Lens, has been absolutely sensational as well. But he's been really, really impressive. I think, maybe the standout of all of these players. I just think it's a really nice mix. Like Sadiki stepping in, Habib Diarra was a really smart signing. They were young, hungry players who you need, physicality, and we spoke about the midfield already, but also to be able to kind of find that blend. And in some ways, I do wonder this, is it easier almost to completely settle in a new team than it is to like keep five pieces? Because everyone's in exactly the same boat. And I was kind of examining what the outs were this summer that made a massive effect. And there's loads of outs, but there's not loads of outs you're like, oh, that feels like a big blow from last season. Joe Bellingham, obviously the kind of headline name in that regard. But, I think that obviously hindsight is an easy thing to say, but I don't remember too many Sunderland fans be like, that's a massive blow to us at the time. I think they were like, yeah, really good player, potential to be excellent, but we will probably be able to recruit a player of similar standing, maybe not similar trajectory, but of similar standing right now. Tommy Watson, as you say, went off to Brighton. Again, mostly used as an impact player, not really
starting,
of a starter. Paddy Roberts, who was excellent in the Championship and did a great shift, but he goes out, and Alan Brown, who'd come in and done a job as well. But apart from that, Jensen Selt, but it wasn't like Sunderland were losing loads of quality players that they thought were going to make the step up. Bellingham really the only one that you'd suggest would have been a starter maybe in the Premier League. And even now, like that's questionable, but I think he's in that picture. And then you bring in 15 players, of which 13 are starting Premier League caliber off the bat. Now, okay, sometimes you get a bit lucky with recruitment, and sometimes players hit the ground when you're not completely expecting them to. And I think Sunderland have had a couple of those. But when you actually look at the names that came through the door, you're looking at them saying players who have played Europa League football, players who've played Champions League football. Okay, maybe they're not absolute top of the pile world beaters. But you and I sat here, and Sam, a couple of weeks ago, and talked about Troida on deadline day. And both of us were like, yeah, we would have had him. Like, Sam from an Aston Villa perspective, me from a Fulham perspective, both of us, like, off the bat before he'd played a game. And again, he's not been someone that's featured loads already, but just a player that just genuinely has that quality. And getting him on loan in deadline day feels like a real oh, okay, we've actually done the hard work. Who else is on the market that we might be able to target? And yes, there's been a big spend, but you have to spend wisely as well. And loads of fans will tell you that from a variety of different clubs. Unless you can throw as much at the wall and make it stick as possible, a la Nottingham Forest a couple of years ago, and that's no shade. They just did it and it worked out, just about, but it worked out. And now they've been able to refine that a little bit more. I don't think Sunderland had that capacity. And I think that when you're looking at all of these players, those 15 that we're talking about there, they're all going to have a say over the course of this season. And that is basically 2/3 of a new squad that you're bedding in, a couple of players that jump up and look comfortable from the Championship. But to do that is quite impressive within itself.
Absolutely. And I think you make a very good point about the outgoing players, but also the players that were replaced that were still at the club. Really good characters as well. Like Luke O'Nien just loves the club. Dan Neil loves the club, was a fan in 2014 when we made the League Cup final. There's Anthony Patterson, who's not going to throw up a stink as well. Again, an academy graduate. There's Dennis Sirkin, who someone gave such an opportunity to after a few difficult spells.
I think he will also, Andre Hume, I think both of them will fancy their chances of working their way back in. And that's great for young players who have that experience at the Championship level, who still have levels to get to, we think. Like having players in front of you like a Reynaldo's not going to be the starting left back for the next 5 years.
No.
It's about settling down. I don't think players are going to be throwing their toys out of the pram about like a season. And if Dennis Sirkin, for example, comes in there and he's like, okay, there's going to be a left back slot up for grabs here. If I keep working here, that could be mine next year. That's a great place for a young player to be.
Absolutely. And I think it did help that in that opening game against West Ham, great team in retrospect to play on that opening day because they've not looked themselves. I think it's their worst start in 52 years. But the fact that the goals were scored by Ballard, Mayenda and Isidor, 3 players that were there last season, it felt like instantly there was a kind of connection with the new signings, and then they were all assisted by new signings and scored by old boys. It had a really nice feel to it, and that's probably just a completely pointless side, but it did feel like these players are ready to contribute. And someone like Dan Ballard who was actually second choice, really. He was on the bench for much of last year and had a big injury towards the end of the year, comes in for the playoffs, scores that goal against Coventry. He's made a massive impact in the games he has played, and he hasn't played every game, but his ability to win balls in the air and just do quite basic but very necessary 25-26 Premier League defending, which does feel like it's much more based around set pieces and physicality and just reading of the game.
Tyrone Mings box defender.
Exactly. And I think he's looked absolutely brilliant. I wanted to run through and see what you thought about some positives and then some negatives about whether Sunderland can maintain a top 10 finish, let's say. I don't think anyone has them down for the Champions League or even European football, but some positive stats that I found. The solid defence is really what we've got to start with. I mean, only Arsenal have conceded fewer than Sunderland's 7. That's level with Man City and Spurs. There's only 7 sides in the entirety of Europe who've conceded fewer goals. And their XG against ranks 6th. So they're not massively overperforming their expected goals against. Mm-hmm. We are strong on set pieces, already mentioned it. We have the second in terms of greatest proportion of shots that have come from set pieces after Burnley. That is a little bit of a worry, but it does feel like a lot of sides, like Spurs, like Arsenal in particular, who do have more weapons around the pitch, but they're also finding a lot of benefit of being very strong on set pieces. And we were last year. We've added a lot of physicality with Alderete, Mukiele, etc. And Xhaka's delivery as well is a real weapon.
Yeah.
And I think that will be really, really key going forward. We're also, at the moment, a really efficient side when defending. So no one in the Premier League can top our 62% tackle success rate. So when we go in for a challenge, and you see it game by game, we're not giving away a lot of fouls. We're not making a lot of mistakes in the challenge as well. We're winning the balls. We're winning second balls as well. We're very strong in the air as well. And what is also pleasing for me is that Habib Diarra, as you mentioned, has missed the last 5 games. Alderete is missing games as well. And he instantly, from that very first game of the season, looked like he was Premier League sort of top half quality, I would say. Then you look at the performances of individual players. Do you think Granit Xhaka will drop off significantly throughout this season? On the basis of the last 4 years, since that turnaround at Arsenal, really, he's been ultra consistent. I think one of the best and most consistent players in Europe in that position as well. He's now 8th for passes into the final third in the league, 15th for progressive passes. And there are 2 workhorses there. And I saw this yesterday. Xhaka and Sadiki have covered more ground than any other players in the Premier League.
Yeah.
And given the fact Xhaka is now deep into his 30s, pretty surprising.
Is there a slight concern there that actually the physical toll of this might take a toll?
Potentially.
But equally, he has been playing more than 1 game a week from the majority of the last couple of of seasons. I don't know. I always kind of find it difficult to kind of judge the age balance against when you get less games. I've been talking about Casemiro, for example. How good does he look on one game a week?
Yeah.
Like, is it going to be a similar story for Xhaka, where he actually has taken a bit? Yes, he's covering more ground per game, but he's taken a bit of the workload off in terms of what he's doing in terms of actual games.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think even during the times at Arsenal where he was really struggling, Xhaka is not someone that's picked up a lot of injuries throughout his career at all. And I think he played pretty much every single game at Bayer Leverkusen as well. And same for Switzerland, always can turn up. Hopefully that continues for the rest of the campaign. In terms of some negatives, because I do think we should temper this very excitable episode. We are 18th for shots per game. There's only West Ham and Burnley who have taken fewer shots. Wilson Isidor, amazing start to the season, but he scored 4 goals from 6 shots on target. A little bit troubling. The player that's taken the...
Messy level.
It's probably not going to continue. The player that's taken the second most shots in our side is Dan Ballard, obviously mainly through headers. We're 18th for shots conceded per game as well. And whilst we are really thriving at the moment, there's only one side in the entirety of Europe that have overperformed their expected points by more than Sunderland, and that's Aston Villa. So I would have liked to see Sam's reaction to that as well. We are 19th for chances created. We are 17th for passes into the final third, 19th for passes into the box. Only Burnley have taken fewer touches in the opposition box as well. It doesn't feel like totally sustainable football. But then at the same time, Jack, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago with Spurs, who continue to pick up results despite their performances. Do you think it is just the kind of season where a side like Sunderland, a bit like Forest last year, it's probably the best example, can continue to pick up points with not playing very progressive, outstandingly open football, let's say?
Yeah, I think it's going to be definitely one of those seasons. I was going to ask you a question on a similar kind of caveat. Dean said something to me on Monday that really started me thinking, and it's not a line that I've heard peddled particularly elsewhere. And he was like, I'm not surprised that the promoted sides are doing well, because actually the football in the Premier League is far more attritional than it has been in recent years. So what you're doing is there's a lot of set pieces, there's a lot of long throws, there's a lot of counter attacks, and it being quite transitional. That opens up a world where players are looking at it going, well, this is quite similar to what I was doing in the Championship. Yeah. You know, the difficulty in recent years has been coming up and finding players who are just better at everything than you're doing. But if everything turns into a physical battle, which it does feel a little bit like at the moment, now I think that's underplaying it and it's an oversimplification 100%. But in terms of when you bring it down to that kind of level, and it does feel a little bit like it's all been simplified to the nth degree, and we're coming back to that sort of 2004 to 2007 period where it was just about who runs the fastest and who smashes into each other the hardest. Like, that's going to be easier for sides coming up from an attritional league in the Championship to compete within, and that doesn't take away from the additions and the smart recruitment of any of the promoted sides, but I think it does make it easier to actually compete in these games, because it's not City playing the ball around you at 100 miles an hour through triangles that you can't get near. It's the ball being lumped into the box and the long throws, etc. And as you say, Dan Ballard currently taking advantage of that, and fair play to him, right? Like, that's not criticism. It's, I would be doing exactly the same if something fell into my lap. But I do think that there is an element of that that's at play here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I did also say it in the summer. I think everyone did in the summer. The amount of quality that left sides in the bottom half that had been established, whether that's Wolves, whether that's Brentford in particular, it did feel like a very good year to get promoted. It was also the most lucrative year to get promoted because of the new Sky TV rights deal as well. So Sunderland just had this massive kitty. And I was actually listening to, he's called Frankie Bridge, I think his name is. Apologies, I definitely know it's Frankie. Anyway, he does the commentary for Sunderland and their in-house channel. And he was talking about on the Monday Night Club on BBC 5 Live, how they managed to sign Xhaka. And I thought it was quite an interesting insight. He said Kirill Louis-Dreyfus, who called off a Swiss number, he's French-Swiss, and he called Xhaka, and within 10 minutes, he managed to convince him to sign because he was so desperate for that challenge. And without that Xhaka signing, I don't think you get the Mukiele, who played with him at Bayer Leverkusen last season. I don't think you get the Alderetes, the Brobbys, the Bertrand Traorés, the players with European pedigree. I think you maybe still get someone like a Diarra or a Sadiki that's done well in Ligue 1 or the Belgian League.
Are they as good? Not alongside. Look, I think that both Diarra and Sadiki might be, players that we look at in a couple of years and like, wow, they played together in Sunderland. Yeah. They could be a pairing, but they're not there yet. And there's someone to guide them and make sure that that's all kind of working in the right ways. Like having an on-pitch basically manager. And Richard Bris has talked about this, right? Like having someone on there who's just a complete commander on the field gets the best out of a player alongside him in particular, I think. And so for two younger players in that area who are kind of trying to make their mark for the first time in the Premier League, like it's invaluable having a Granit Xhaka alongside you to just help you through those tough moments and make sure that things are covered. I think that's interesting. And I also think that there's an element of that maybe there is still some signings. I in terms of like a few of those you mentioned, I think an Omar Alderete probably still comes. Maybe not a Mukiele, maybe not Hertroida, but I think he still comes. But what I am, to go back to your point about overperformance, there's definitely something to worry about there. I'm not suggesting that it's all good, and there are going to be games where the set pieces don't work to your advantage, and it's not like an Arsenal where there are so many different elements of your game that you can turn to in those moments to make it happen that there's not to say Sunderland are one-dimensional, but they're more one-dimensional than Arsenal.
Absolutely.
And that's fine. But being a team who are utilising the Arsenal playbook, fast transition, win set pieces, score from set pieces, keep shots out at the other end. Okay, not to the same extent of refusing shots on target, but keeping them out and keeping teams down to low scores. Well, that's a playbook that's currently winning the league.
Absolutely.
So to copy it, even in a kind of minor fashion, seems like a pretty smart move. Now, I don't think that's on purpose. I don't think they've looked at this and gone, let's just do Arsenal but worse. But I do think that being solid, having a good goalkeeper has been a bit of a game changer, huge. I think. And Roefs' introduction to this league has been better than anyone could have imagined for a keeper of kind of where he'd been beforehand. But equally, you build that confidence, right? And so whilst there is an overperformance and there are going to be games where that's baffled, and look, I said it earlier, right? You look at the game against Burnley, which you kind of look at as an early relegation 6-pointer, and you go away from home and lose. I'm like, ooh, that's not comfortable, because I had Sunderland down as absolutely rock solid favourites to win that game, and suddenly Burnley are on the board, and you're like, ooh, that's a relegation rival, etc. But the way that they've bounced back from that, the way they've bounced back from the United performance, and I think that speaks to now that the confidence has become a little bit innate almost, right? It's not being knocked by a single bad performance. And that in itself, I think, is something to cling on to as something that you can start to become consistent.
Absolutely. And I think Regis Bris is known for just being an outstanding, almost obsessive coach. He's not a big personality manager. He's not going to make it about him. But he's got a phenomenal record, particularly at Lorient and taking through that team, etc. Yeah. And he will just he'll love working every day on the grass with these players that have come in. We've got the second youngest average age in the Premier League behind Chelsea. I think it's 7th in Europe, and there's Strasbourg that are way ahead, who've got an average age of around 20s. Insane stuff.
Which is a bit nuts, especially considering Ben Chilwell's there.
Exactly. But a few more sort of concerns, as it were. We've got Roefs not overperforming necessarily, but does he keep this level up for the entire season? Maybe not.
Probably not.
Isidor as well. We look at the amount of XG that players have created. So Isidor has got 2.5 XG to his name after 9 games. Ballard, who's started 4 games, is on 1.2. Talby is the only other player above 1. That is a little bit of a concern. Isidor, can he keep that up for an entire season? That is a big ask. And you look at someone like, I was looking into it earlier, Igor Thiago, for example, at Brentford, is getting so many more shots. He's getting so many more on target than Isidor, who has been very clinical, but just the pure quantity of shots that someone like Igor Thiago is getting feels so much more sustainable.
Yeah.
Again, you look at Bertrand Traore in terms of expected assists, so the quality of chance that someone's laying on. He's top. He's at 0.28. Again, Dan Ballard is second for the quality of chance created, not Granit Xhaka. So Dan Ballard better stay absolutely lethal in both boxes. Is that
because you're playing off second balls in terms of set piece creation? Like, it's a header back across as opposed to...
For sure, but there's just... I need to see a little bit more from open play before I think that we can, even get anywhere close to thinking about Europe. And we're only 5 points ahead of 13th at the moment. It can change quite dramatically. And yeah. I'm loving the ride.
But also, if I offered you right now 17th on goal difference at the end of the season, you take it, 100%. Right? So, everything above that is currently an overperformance.
Yeah.
And so, there is a level here where I think Sunderland are probably in a slightly false position. And that's okay, right? There's no worries about that. There's no bother with it.
Good time to do an episode.
It's totally fine. No, but it's totally fine to be in a false position. The question would be, if Sunderland were in a false position and they were 10th, then you start to be like, is that a little bit uncomfortable because the bottom's going to be a bit of a scrap and you can get pulled into the whirlpool. Whereas right now, I don't think Sunderland are going to finish in the top. I don't think Sunderland are going to finish in the top 10, but that's okay. Like, is it if Sunderland finish a comfortable 13th, that is all the goals met. Season. That's all the goals met and so much more. And I think that should remain the conversation, right? Like and I think Richard Bris is doing a very good thing about this. You know, he's like, we're getting to 40 points, and then we'll have conversations about everything else. And that's exactly the right attitude. It's one game after another, because that will help in the bad periods. And we haven't got on to what December is going to look like, right? Because not only is it an absolutely horrendous run of fixtures, but also AFCON is going to hit Sunderland harder than almost any other team. And so not only is it going to become a slightly more skeleton squad, but also you're then coming into the games that look most difficult as well. That's not particularly pretty.
Well, you're spot on. This is what I was going to go to next. Everyone in the summer pointed out the AFCON factor with Sunderland, and I'm sure it was taken on board by the recruitment team. No recruitment team isn't aware of the concept of AFCON for sure. But they weren't just signing players for this year, of course. But of Sunderland's 11 most used players this season, 7 are going to AFCON. Sadiki is third, and Masuaku, they're going with DR Congo. Talbi is going with Morocco, Ronaldo, Mozambique, Habib Diarra is going with Senegal, Adingra, Ivory Coast, Traore will go with Burkina Faso. And whilst you'd expect Senegal, Morocco and Ivory Coast to go quite far, Mozambique have never made it out the group stages, so Ronaldo might come back quite soon. But a word of warning, thinking that Sadiki will be back soon as well. DR Congo finished 4th in 2023.
Yeah.
Burkina Faso, again.
They're in the playoffs as well of the World Cup. So like it's another one where they're a side worth keeping an eye on.
For sure.
They're a lot of fun, by the way, to watch.
And again, you might think, Burkina Faso, Traore will be back quite soon. They finished 3rd in 2017. They finished 4th in 2021. And they reached the round of 16 in 2023. So there is no sort of element that, of these 7 players, only 3 will be there deep into the tournament. And you mentioned the fixtures. I mean, have a load of this. So we've got Everton on Monday. They're currently 14th. Then we've got Arsenal at home. I mean, I'll be delighted to get a shot on target. Fulham.
So would anyone.
Fulham away, which I think I'm going to, which I'm very excited for. Then Bournemouth, Liverpool, City, Newcastle, Brighton, Leeds, City again, all before the end of December. The easiest games on that, on paper, Leeds, just been promoted, playing pretty well at the moment. Brighton, who are 13th, can beat anyone, as we've seen over the last few seasons. And Fulham. Newcastle, and Fulham too. Yeah, very good point. Fulham, definitely the easiest on the start of the season so far. Everton on Monday already feels massive. And there's a derby against Newcastle thrown in, which is going to be... I mean, they're always hellish, to be totally honest, and there's so much riding on that one, especially with if Newcastle are behind, hypothetically, Sunderland in the table at that stage. There's a lot of games before then as well. That is going to be very, very heated indeed. But that is a hellish run, Jack, when you've got a lot of players missing.
100%. I mean, look, in terms of when AFCON is going to be, right, that's the other element of this, because it's going to be mid-December, right? So you're coming into this from a slightly different perspective in that... You'd almost rather the AFCON, you got Liverpool and City, and maybe not Newcastle, that's a different story, but like look at all those teams, you'd be like, can you have them during that period, because it's going to be difficult anyway. Yeah. So like have them in there. But the Leeds game in the mid of that period, the Brighton game I think is one day before AFCON starts, the Brentford game in January, the Crystal Palace game, and then the City and Tottenham in there, which I'm maybe not gimme Spurs, but like definitely against City, you're not expecting those. But I think that you're looking at those kind of games and thinking, well, if current form holds, etc., there is a chance that the Sunderland come out of those on the right side. Suddenly, with a skeleton squad, it looks a lot more difficult, and they're games that you will actually be a bit loath to lose points in, especially the Leeds game, I think, in terms of the way that the two sides have started. So that for me is the difficult bit of this, because the really tricky run comes just before AFCON, and actually it eases up a tad at that point, but you're going to lose a load of players. So it's kind of like both barrels at once. So this period now, from pretty much when we're speaking to the end of AFCON in January, could be quite a lean one. Now, maybe Sunderland have already done enough to put...
I don't know.
No, but to put themselves so that when we come out at the edge of that conversation, that they're 14th rather than 17th and scrambling for water. But I think it's a different conversation to have in terms of where we are now and expectations as opposed to where we will be come middle of January.
100%. The thing that is pleasing me most about it, Roefs isn't going to AFCON. Xhaka's not going to AFCON. Neither's Mukiele. Neither's Alderete. That is a nice base. Isidor, Brobby, Mayenda will still be here. Aside from that, it's kind of all changing in midfield and attack. And people like Enzo Lefebvre, who's actually started really well, I think, in the Premier League, despite not necessarily starting every game. And players like Dan Neil, Luke O'Nien, they'll have to step up in that time. And I hope
I'm a little bit worried about who's going to play on the wings.
Yeah, we don't have a load of options. Hopefully Mundell's back by that stage as well, because he actually was one of our shining lights last season. He was keeping Tommy Watson out the side as well. Okay, crystal ball time, Jack. Where do you think Sunderland are finishing this season? And there's no wrong answers. I mean, you're out of punch zone.
Yeah, I'm kind of just about far enough away from Dougie. I think that the start has meant that the momentum will keep with you. And I think that even if there's a period now where there is a couple of difficult fixtures, I've been in grounds, both for myself and in opposition grounds, where you see a newly promoted side start to slip away and the mood just changes. And it's like, we're slogging to the ground every week. It's really long. We don't want to be here, etc. I don't think that's going to happen for Sunderland, because I think there's already enough goodwill in the bank that a bad run of results and you being back in the fight would energise as opposed to deplete the stadium of energy. And so I think that there's going to be enough in terms of the connection between the fan base, the players that have been signed that already look Premier League quality, and the fact that, there are going to be up and down periods throughout the season. I also do think that there's probably 2 relegation spots up for grabs here. Yeah. One of them might well be fulfilled by Wolves. I still don't necessarily think Burnley have enough. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you in terms of scoring goals, but maybe that changes, and I'm eating humble pie in a couple of months. But in terms of, so what that leaves is, Sunderland have to finish ahead of a West Ham, a Fulham, Forest, Leeds. Anyone else that gets sucked, I think that's probably enough of who's going to get sucked in. I thought Brentford might, but I don't think they are. There is an element of this that I think that currently, in terms of the way that the squad is put together and the fight and the compactness of it, the way that they move as a unit, the ability to change the game off the bench with someone like a Brian Brobby, who we've seen precious little of, we should probably add, right? And then one of his first Premier League experiences, it's bad defending. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's an incredibly well-worked goal by him, but he's done what he needed to do. Yeah. He's held the defenders off, he's laid the pass perfectly, and the goal happens. That's one of the first things we've seen from Brian Brobby in terms of making an impact. And he's not really been able to do it outside of Amsterdam at any given point at this point. That doesn't mean it's not translatable. There was a weird period to go to Leipzig and all of that. So, there are still players to come in and make a difference. So I'm going to say, if I was going to put my life on it, I'd say 15th. But I think that that's probably a low estimate. I
would absolutely take that.
No. Also, that would be so. For sure. That would be so good.
I said before a ball was kicked, I wanted 17th, and if we survive this year, that's kind of what I'm aiming for. I think my head probably says 14th is probably the max we could get to. But my heart at the moment is saying, 12th. Let's aim for the top 10. Let's see. But obviously, this next couple of months is going to be
Palace's
absolutely
spot.
Massive.
You can't have that.
Yeah, exactly. On that note, Jack, do you have you've seen some Fulham sides come up and thrive, the current one, but you've also seen some go down. What is your it's almost a bit basic of a question, but your top tip, or what has separated those sides in terms of your Fulham experiences in the difference?
I think that sticking with the manager is a big thing. Fulham, the first time we came up under Slavica Kanovic, went way too early. Now, it wasn't working, and I totally understand why managed to get sacked, but then completely changed philosophy.
Who did you get next?
Ranieri.
Right.
So we've gone from one of the most attacking, swashbuckling managers that we've ever had to perhaps the most defensive. It didn't work, and Scott Parker came in as a caretaker once Ranieri was sacked, about at the time we got relegated. So faith in the manager's philosophy is a big thing, and having buy-in from the players to it. I think there is a level of acquisition into a system that you're buying into, and that I think has been achieved already, right? You look at the players here, there's no one that stands out from the Sunderland, acquisitions over the summer who I'm saying they don't really fit with what Bris is trying to do. Like, it doesn't look like I'm looking at any players there who don't have a natural space in the system. Now, maybe they can't all fit together, obviously, there's too many of them, but everyone has a role that feels like it fits within what he wants to do as a manager. And I think what Fulham didn't do the first time we came up, and even to an extent the second time, we bought players who were like on the market because they were good, not necessarily with how they would fit within the system that we were playing. So I would suggest that is the thing that stands out the most. I also think there is an element of sometimes being too defensive. Now, you can grind your way to survival, but you have to win games. And I think what kind of doomed like an Ipswich last season was that they abandoned those principles of trying to win games and actually sort of try to hang in there and win games on the counter. And I know you have to adapt. I'm not suggesting that everyone should try and have 60% possession against Man City and kind of dominate the ball, because you'll get pumped. But in terms of games that you're looking at and saying, okay, that's doable. And right now, I think you look at a lot of the mid-table teams, let's say this Everton game, like, I wouldn't want Sunderland to sit there and have 30% possession in this game. I want them to counter punch. Sure, they don't have to have all the ball, but I think that having belief that your philosophy will work instead of trying to revert to, all hands to the pump to keep it out of the back of our net is a system that tends to give a little bit more joy. And also, as an experience as a fan, you get more from, even if it doesn't work, you get more from going in there and having a go. And I think that's been one of Sunderland's great strengths in the first couple of months.
Absolutely. I mean, either way, we are just so far ahead of schedule in terms of where I thought we'd be when we were in those League One days. I didn't think we'd get out of the Championship so quickly. It wasn't so long ago that we were all seen crying on Netflix, and there was Stuart Donald and Charlie Methven and Phil Parkinson, and just a succession of really quite poor...
Why am I seeing Zlatan Ibrahimovic?
Yeah. Although Scott McTominay was on that list, which made a lot of sense. He hadn't made his debut for Man United, so they hadn't completely lost their minds on that list. But yeah, everyone remembers that series, and we actually found the Championship a lot easier than League One, if that made sense. I think we were by far the biggest side in League One at that moment, and it was so exciting.
Target on your back,
and it was really, really difficult. It was a real slog, and we made that league look very, very difficult. Championship was slightly different, although there was still the Michael Beale season, etc. But now we are back in the Premier League, kind of by almost a little bit of chance. I think it's ahead of schedule. We've had an amazing summer, and I'm just going to try and ride and enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride, seriously, because I never thought this was going to happen when we're struggling in that playoff final against Sheffield United. And here we are, fourth in the Premier League. So long may it continue. Guys, that has been The Truth for another week. It will be all three of us if Sam comes back from Greece at some stage. It does look lovely.
Yeah.
And if he hasn't been struck down by the latest cold.
He's actually managing Panathinaikos now.
Yeah. That'd be great. But thank you so much for listening this week. Go check out Ranks FC with Jack and Dean from earlier this week as well. And we'll catch you next time. Goodbye. Thank you so much for watching another episode of The Truth on my YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this, make sure you go check out the audio version as well. You can listen to it anywhere on the Ranks FC feed. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. And I'll catch you next week.